This video is on the environmental effects of the endangerment of sea otters. So first things first, how did sea otters become endangered and why did they stay that way? It really started as a result of them being hunted for their fur in the 20th century by fur traders. And that was like a severe population bottleneck that they went through. And since then, they've been unable to fully recover, and that's due to things like oil spills, specifically the Exxon Valdez spill off the coast of California. And then studies were actually done to see how often these otters were encountering oil. And estimates were on a weekly to monthly basis, but there was seasonal shifts in exposure rates, with most exposure actually occurring during birthing season. So that is a really big risk to otter offspring who can't yet groom themselves. And then also things like shark attacks, predation from whales, disease. Interestingly enough, white shark bites have been recently the leading cause of mortality, even though sea otters are not considered a prey item for them. There's researchers didn't really find evidence that sharks were eating the otter corpses. More so, they think that they're like exploratory bites or like testing bites. And then on the subject of prey for the otters have also been endangered in recent times, either endangered or extinct or declining. And so when researchers go out and look at sea otters, a lot of times they're emaciated due to either not being able to find food or actually diseases that they might have. And then finally, toxic algal blooms also affect these sea otters' recovery. And that's either directly through poisoning that researchers have found levels of a certain poison in sea otter corpses, or through poisoning of things like shellfish, which sea otters prey upon. So why do we care about sea otters being endangered? They're considered a cornerstone species for their ecosystem, and they're extremely important in maintaining kelp forests, which are important, one for kelp forest habitats. That is an entire ecosystem. It's basically the marine version of deforestation. If otters aren't there to stop sea urchins from decimating a kelp forest, it's like losing a forest. It's biodiversity lost. It's an entire ecosystem lost. And in human interest, really, kelp is actually being used in modern ways to kind of deal with the climate change issue that we have. There is multiple companies who actually estimate that kelp can take out gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere and then sequester itself in the seafloor and basically become oil again. They actually described it as running the oil industry in reverse. And that could be a novel way for us to deal with the issues that we have.
So we talked about sea otters being a cornerstone species, or aka a key species, but they're also a sentinel species, which means a sentinel species could be any organism, which is often animals, but they're used to detect risks in humans by providing advanced warning of danger. And marine mammals specifically, such as sea otters, they're good indicators of what may happen in the future. So like in this image, you can see how the gulls diets change when sea otter populations are present or not. So if we do have otters, we also have a greater presence of fish because the water is going to be healthier, the ecosystem is going to be better taken care of with the sea otters. And then without the sea otters, we see that we don't have as many fish, which means the gulls diet goes more towards invertebrates than to fish. If that happens too often, we may see less invertebrates in the environment, which may make that cascade go from the ocean ecosystem to the land ecosystem. So it may change everything if we don't have sea otters as a keystone or sentinel species in the water. Here we can see sea otters can prevent diseases, especially zoonotic diseases, from animals to humans, by watching or supervising the health of otters and studying the things that cause disease in them and their food, like shellfish. We can avoid possible pathogens to come to humans. In other words, we may be avoiding the next HIV or COVID-19 because they were also both believed to have being jumped from animals to humans. It also says diseases works both ways, and shellfish may be the vectors for anthropogenic pathogens to infect sea otters. So the same way that they can infect us, they can infect them. So by studying that, we can prevent the next pandemic or the next big wave of diseases.
So obviously, otters, keystone species, very important for their specific ecosystem. They also, in a broader sense, have an effect on coastal marine environments as sort of a region or a biome. So as stated before, losing the sea otter would be devastating for kelp forests. And we really don't have a way to predict what widespread loss of kelp forests would do. It's just losing an entire ecosystem is too hard to really evaluate. Especially we're still at that point where we can't even evaluate why all the reasons that we as humans are affecting sea otters. So predicting the loss of sea otters and the extent of its effect on the world and us is almost impossible. And as stated before, sea otters can become infected with land diseases. And this is seen actually in 1979 when the first sea otter was reported to have a case of coccidioidomycosis. Not sure if I said that right. But basically they're a host to a fungus called C. amitis. And this is like a systemic disease. And this opens the range up for this disease to infect other marine species. And we really don't know how far the disease can spread from sea otters. So we don't know if eventually every or most species in coastal marine environments could be susceptible to this fungus just from sea otters now having been infected by them. And we really don't know how it happened. A possible avenue of future research could be looking into if it was a lack of ability to fight off the pathogen due to the population bottleneck that they went through. Because obviously we know that the less genetic diversity there is in a population, the less ability it has to fight off a single disease. Like a single disease could devastate a population if they all look relatively the same genotype wise. And segueing into that, they actually did do a study of whether or not sea otters underwent a loss of genetic diversity due to fur trading and other human activity. And so they actually took DNA from ancestral otter corpses and they compared it to multiple populations of extant sea otter populations. And they actually did show that they did prove that the genetic diversity loss was due to fur trading and that population bottleneck that they went through. And if we don't, monitor them and care for them properly, that could lead to an inbreeding depression, and it might be the final nail in the coffin for the sea otter.
So here we can see the decline in sea otters over the years. First, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services estimated that there were only 3,000 otters left in the wild as of 2019. The record high for sea otters since their initial decline was estimated to be 31,086 in 2016, but it has declined again, and it probably did decline since 2019. That being said, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did try to attempt to establish a population at St. Nicholas Island in the 1980s as an attempt to shield the species from the effects of the oil spill that happened. However, this failed, and now that population in the island only contains around 100 otters right now. And they also, aside from that island, they only occupy around 13% of the historic range, which is from Monterey Bay in California to Point Conception. Apart from an anthropogenic limitation due to industry, largely attributed to shark attacks occurring at the extremes of the current range, preventing further colonization. And I do believe their previous range would go from Alaska all the way down to Mexico. So that is a pretty big decrease in range. What can we do right now? Population growth has halted and begun to decline again recently. Understanding how to aid recovery is critical to help the sea otters bounce back from their decline. We used to believe that human involvement was limited to direct capture. However, we now understand that it can be extended to introduction of pathogens, like we've talked about before, also through soil runoff and oil, as well as just getting the same food that they do, and then getting pathogens to that food, and then they get the pathogens and they die because of it. The abundance of food is also one of the items being influenced because of climate change, which is human caused. That's just another reason why humans are contributing to sea otter decline. The California Sea Otter Fund has funded conservation efforts and organizations with $3 million since 2007, but we must reach a minimum to stay on tax ballots each year. So donations keep research funded, and research gives us the sea otters a fighting chance. So one of the things that we can do is just donate to research, and direct donations are better. Moving away from industries like oil and the fur, because fur trade was one of the initial transitions to why sea otters were declining. Moving away from those industries may prevent another species from sharing the sea otter circumstances, and it may also help the sea otters themselves. This is something that we can do at the individual level. While socioeconomics is complicated, at the end of the day, people should do what they need to do in order to survive. Voting with your money is a powerful way to make change.
So this was our presentation. Thank you so much for watching, and we do hope that you took something from it.